DFS. It is Friday, December 30th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 17 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, the past couple weeks, we smushed DraftKings and FanDuel together into one show to make way for the draft show. Did hear from users, though, who were like, wait a second, I just play this one, I just play the other one. You guys were one of the few that were just doing a separate show for each. I liked that. Why did that go away? So I said, hey, I thought it would be better to fit in the draft show, but if people want it separated, we're going to go ahead and separate it. We're going to do DraftKings first. We're going to do FanDuel second, and we're still going to do the draft show after that.
I'm with those people. My brain prefers them separate, and I do think they tend to be different enough, on a week-to-week basis that it's worth keeping them separate. So I'm happy.
And my brain is with trying to make people happy around me. So we'll do it like we did the old way. We'll start with DraftKings here. We'll start, of course, with cash quarterbacks. And Jared, this is fertile 5K quarterback ground this week. I love how many guys were sitting there with fives at the beginning of their DraftKings salary when I fired up the lineup generator this week.
For sure, yeah. And for me, it's Jared Goff in cash, who does come in as our best value at the position. We've talked about his home road splits throughout the year. He's averaging 23.1 DraftKings points per game at home this year, 21 plus DK points in 5 of his 8 home games. And he's just in a great spot here against a bad Bears defense. The Lions have the highest implied total on the main slate at 29 points, higher than even the Chiefs who are at home for the Broncos.
Yeah, I think he's an even better option than our current ceiling projection gives him credit for. It's just a great spot. He's been a high floor guy. He hasn't been turning the ball over. He's facing a terrible defense. So I think he's easily the top cash play. I think if Jalen Hurts doesn't play, Gardner Minshew enters the discussion at 5,500. But I mean, $100 cheaper than somebody who has been delivering for us even longer in Jared Goff. It makes Goff the easy top guy there. And then shifting over to tournament lineups, I certainly think Goff is in play there as well, because we know that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be highly owned. We know that matchup is going to be well played. The ownership projection on Goff right now, though, is not crazy high. You can play him. You can play St. Brown. You can add DJ Chark to that to differentiate it some. His ownership projection is not high right now. And I mean, I'm not sure how many people are going to go Goff, St. Brown, Chark, and like Cole Kmet. Like that should be a better differentiating lineup than you would think just looking at the ownership rates on either St. Brown or Cole Kmet this week.
For sure, yeah. I'm going to play Goff in tournaments even at the ownership. I think he's just too strong a play at the price tag. I think, like you said, you just want to make sure you get different. I think playing Chark gets you different. Playing DeAndre Swift gets you different at 8%. I think you could consider playing Goff without Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then even if you do want to play, a chalkier Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown with, say, Chark in there, just make sure you're playing a low owned guy or two at one of your other spots. I think it's definitely doable this week.
Mm-hmm. Who else are you playing a tournament quarterback?
Trevor Lawrence is coming in at 6% ownership. I'm playing him if that holds. He scored 19 DraftKings points last week, which I thought was actually a pretty good performance considering the spot on the road against a tough Jets defense in bad weather. 28 plus DraftKings points in 3 of his previous 4 games. And I think, Evan Ingram is the top value at tight end. And I think, Zay Jones is a good value at wide receiver. I think you can consider stacking Lawrence with ETN, who is a pretty solid value at running back. So lots of stacking options. I'm surprised Lawrence is coming in at such low ownership.
I am too. And it's not so much that he's underrated. It looks like people are just spreading it around at quarterback right now, which I guess probably makes him a little bit underrated because he isn't higher than that 6%, but that's one of the higher numbers at quarterback right now. But looking at the numbers in our lineup generator, he's tied with Brock Purdy. He's tied with Aaron Rodgers. He's behind Daniel Jones. Like none of those things should be true, I don't think.
Yep. Agreed.
I think Teddy Bridgewater at 5K is also interesting. It feels like the week to pick the right 5K QB. And there are lots of options. There are really not that many that I'm that interested in, though. 9 of our top 11 quarterbacks in DK dollars per point sit at $5,700 or less this week. There's no Josh Allen on the main slate. There's no Joe Burrow. We'll see about Jalen Hurts. The latest is Nick Sirianni not wanting to name a QB starter before Friday's practice. So we'll see if Minshew's in the mix there. But Teddy Bridgewater stands out. if only because he's got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle at his disposal.
Oh yeah, we're on the same page here. I love Bridgewater as a tournament play. Coming in at what we have him at 4% projected ownership. I mean, he's $5,000. Tua is 7,000. I wouldn't be playing Tua in this spot at 7,000, but if Tua was like 6,000, I'd be playing him. And I don't know how big a downgrade Teddy Bridgewater really is. I mean, he's thrown 60 passes this year with the Fans. He's averaging 8.7 yards per pass attempt. Tua is at 8.9. No knock against Tua, but I think his success this season has been more to do with the scheme and the weapons. So I think Bridgewater can come in and do a good Tua impersonation. The Patriots too, Jalen Mills, Jack Jones, Marcus Jones, all looking doubtful for this game, and Jonathan Jones is dealing with injury too. So that secondary is really banged up. We saw Joe Burrow have no trouble against that pass defense, at least in the first half of last week's game. So I don't think this matchup is going to be as tough for Bridgewater as like the numbers might make it look on paper.
And if Bridgewater does impersonate Tua, let's just hope he doesn't do the version from the past 3 weeks where he's been Tuable, because he's, like we mentioned on yesterday's podcast, he was just awful in those 3 games. Really, like, I mean, fantasy numbers have been better than the real life performance, but especially against Green Bay, he just looked awful. So I agree. I don't think it's really a downgrade to Bridgewater. And really what we're taking is quarterback for the Dolphins as opposed to any individual player.
Exactly.
I think it's worth, like, Patrick Mahomes obviously stands out as a tournament play here. He always has the upside, but I think that there's some risk to his ceiling numbers in that these Denver Broncos look like they've quit. Like, if this game gets one-sided like it did last time, we could see the Chiefs kind of pull back and just limit things in general, as similar to what they did last week.
Yeah, although that first game against the Broncos, was close into the fourth quarter. So that's kind of what you're hoping with Mahomes. If I'm playing Mahomes, I'm playing one of the Broncos receivers, because I think you're going to need one of those guys to have a pretty good day to, push Mahomes to have one of his 30-pointers.
And Jerry Jeudy did still manage to practice Thursday after leaving Wednesday's practice early with an ankle issue. So it looks like he's probably trending toward playing, but we'll have to watch the situation for those guys if you are using one of them.
I prefer Sutton this week for $1,300 less on DraftKings. If I'm playing one of those Chiefs stacks, I think Sutton would be my preferred Bronco run back.
I think I'd rather avoid that whole situation, just play Kelsey and then take guys from other games.
That works too.
Running back for cash, Jared, what's your favorite here?
I'm playing Christian McCaffrey at the $9,000 price tag. I know he underwhelmed last week, but he had 28 plus DraftKings points in each of his previous 3 games. Now he gets the Raiders 29th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. So I'm scared not to play McCaffrey in cash. I'm going to play Travis Etienne as well. I think $6,400 is just too cheap for the type of usage he's getting. 71+% of the Jags offensive snaps in 8 straight healthy games for Etienne. He has 17, 19, and 22 carries over his last 3 games. I think he's going to be around that level in this game against Houston, where Jacksonville should be playing with a lead.
Yeah, I can't argue against McCaffrey or Travis Etienne. I think Leonard Fournette is not overly attractive, but at 5,600, he worked like the number 1 running back for the Bucs last week. He's now coming off a season high 30 opportunities, 29 touches. I think I like him better as a cash play than as a tournament play, because I'm not sure how much ceiling there is to him, but I mean, he could see double-digit targets again. It wouldn't be the first time this season or even the first time in these past 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm with you that I feel, and he is in play for me in cash. I'm kind of deciding between Fournette and James Conner for my final cash spot, and Conner's way more expensive, so you'd have to go cheaper at tight end. We can talk about that in a bit. Fournette in tournaments, I feel like he's not a tournament play, but he's also coming in as our top value at running back, and he's projected for just 6% ownership. So I'm wondering if I should consider him in tournaments. I think even 20 out of him in a smaller field tournament at his price tag, I think would be good enough, which I definitely think is within his range.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely worth keeping his salary in mind, because we don't need as much of a blow up as we would if he were a 7K running back at this point.
Exactly.
I think Tyler Algier and Brian Robinson are interesting, more interesting than they are a lot of weeks on this full PPR site. 5,300 for Algier against Arizona, 5,200 for Brian Robinson against Cleveland. Both tremendous rushing matchups. Both guys should be good bets to get work. Both guys have a shot to hit that 100-yard threshold that gives you the 3-point bonus, makes up for a lack of receiving. And we did see Tyler Algier lead the backfield in receiving last week. So that's not enough to say he's the backfield leader for receiving, but we can at least say maybe he leads the backfield in receiving again, gets several receptions in this game to help whatever he's able to do on the ground. I think they're in play for cash. I think they're more attractive even as we shift over to tournament lineups.
Yeah, they're probably my, fifth and sixth favorite cash options at running back. So I won't get to them in cash, I don't think, but I do like both guys for tournaments, both coming in with reasonable ownership projections. Robinson, 9%, Algier, 11%. I prefer Robinson among the two, especially with Antonio Gibson looking iffy for this game. He has a pair of injuries. He's on the injury report, has not yet practiced this week. So if he's out, I'm sure Robinson's ownership would probably spike. So maybe we actually want Gibson to play and maybe just be limited. I like Miles Sanders for tournaments as well. $5,900. It's Sanders' cheapest price tag since week 3. I like him better if it's Minshew at quarterback. We saw Sanders. He didn't deliver big fantasy numbers last week, but he got 21 carries last week in that loss to Dallas. And as we talked about, I think he has higher touchdown upside with Hurts not in there. Although we did see Minshew get the Jalen Hurts 1 yard quarterback plunge. So yeah, maybe Sanders will keep getting screwed at the goal line, even with Minshew in there.
I'm a little scared of Miles Sanders entering the game with an injury, even if he's active, obviously. But that frightens me a little bit, especially when I have a couple other 5K attractive running backs that we just talked about.
Yeah, we'll see the practice report today. He returned to a limited practice yesterday. If he's full go off the injury report, I'll feel comfortable playing him.
I think it's interesting that Travis Etienne's only at 13% projected ownership. That's one of the higher running backs, but he's 5th on the running back list and obviously has as good a matchup as anyone. And we've seen it hasn't been the norm of Jacksonville loading him up with carries, but we've at least seen it happen a couple of times. So we could get a truly monster game from Etienne in this one.
For sure. Yeah, I'm going to be playing him at that ownership for sure in tournaments. I mentioned DeAndre Swift, $5,300 for a guy with his passing game role. This is obviously an offense in a game environment we want a piece of this week. And Swift coming in at just 8% ownership. And the last guy I have here is Jerick McKinnon, who was, pretty popular last week, was underwhelming, didn't kill you. He scored a touchdown, but didn't have a big game. He's now coming in at 3% projected ownership against this Broncos team that he went for 35 DraftKings points against just a few weeks ago. So if that ownership holds, I'm going to definitely be having some McKinnon in tournament lineups. He's a guy you could stack up with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, he's a better DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, and Swift's more popular this week, so maybe we go to McKinnon.
Yeah, it won't be Swift for me, but I can get on board with all those other guys. Over to wide receiver. For cash, Greg Dortch sits at the top of our list for dollars per point right now at 3K. Is he actually in play here, Jared?
I don't think so, because I think 0 is in his range of outcomes, right? I mean, we saw it the 2 previous games. Like, we don't know what the Cardinals wide receiver core is going to look like. It seems to me that Dortch got the playing time last week because of the Marquise Brown situation where he, got disciplined at least early in that game. So that made Dortch the slot receiver. I think there's a decent chance they go back to AJ Green being the third guy along with Marquise Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. So I'm going to stay away from Dortch and cash.
It doesn't seem like Cliff Kingsbury knows yet what is really on his team, because really, it seems like at this point you should have in your mind what is the best alignment versus AJ Green being the number 3 wide receiver or Greg Dortch being the number 3 wide receiver. And there has been some moving around. There was that game mid-season where he spent Rondale Moore on the outside of the formation throughout the game before Marquise Brown was back. Then, kind of wasting him out there. So this is always a situation that I don't want to trust good coaching coming through. So you could play Dortch at 3K in a tournament lineup, if we don't hear ahead of the game what the alignment's going to be. But I agree. I would not trust that he is going to be the starting slot receiver here, because I think probably their best alignment is Marquise Brown inside, DeAndre Hopkins outside, the other side, rotating among the remaining guys.
Yeah, if Dortch's ownership stays at 2%, though, I'll play him in tournaments, because every time he's gotten playing time this season, he's produced. He's gone for 20 plus in each of his last 2 games where he's been on the field a decent amount. So if that ownership holds, I think he's a really good play at minimum price.
And the slot's been an excellent spot if you're a Cardinals receiver this year. So for sure.
Yep.
For cash, I like Zay Jones at 5K. He's second
Yep.
in our DK dollars per point. He's $1,000 cheaper than Christian Kirk, who is 23rd in our dollars per point. So that shows how close they are in the projections. 1/10 of a PPR point between them. They've been running even in usage recently. So if I just look at them in a vacuum, I don't have a strong preference between Zay Jones and Christian Kirk head up, deciding on them for one slot. Christian Kirk is also tied for second in projected ownership among wide receivers right now. I think that's too high for him. Just like even just looking at the matchup, we've talked plenty about how we're not using this Houston matchup as a reason to downgrade wide receivers, but I think this is where you do factor it in that there is at least the downside that Jacksonville doesn't go crazy passing like, Houston opponents have done throughout the season. And then even if they're successful passing, you've mentioned that the slot has been a spot where they've been tougher in coverage.
Yep.
So they could have a successful day, even with Christian Kirk not having a big day. And we've also talked about how there are enough options here that they don't have to have Christian Kirk centrally involved in passing success. So overall, I would say Christian Kirk is a fade for me because I'm not too scared about him blowing up in this spot.
Yeah, for sure. Houston, a top 3 defense against slot receivers for the course of the entire season. A neutral matchup for outside wide receivers, and Kirk has played about 2/3 of his snaps in the slot this season. Zay Jones has been outside for about 2/3 of his snaps. So on paper, it's definitely a better matchup for Zay Jones. And we saw the Texans limit Christian Kirk to I think 1 catch in their first meeting. Zay Jones didn't do anything in that game either, but Marvin Jones had the big game, who of course is their other outside wide receiver. So it's easily Zay Jones over Christian Kirk for me, considering the DraftKings prices. Otherwise, at cash, I'm staying in the $5,000 range. I'm going back to Juju Smith-Schuster. He disappointed last week, but his volume has just really been steady for most of the season. He has 8+ targets in 8 of his 12 healthy games this season. He went for 74 yards and a score on 9 catches against Denver a few weeks ago. So $5,600 seems like a nice price for Juju. Then I'm going to play Garrett Wilson too. The matchup is tough against Seattle. That's the team that just, limited Juju Smith-Schuster. But, Garrett Wilson at this price tag, what he's done in Mike White starts this season, I think he's talented enough to deliver, at least for cash at this price. I do think he's a good tournament fade because of the matchup.
Yeah, high ownership and the matchup. I agree that he's a tournament fade. I won't argue with him in cash, but I think it is worth weighing that matchup that has been truly bad for wide receiver scoring on the year. I agree with the talent, but the numbers are certainly there that there is risk to him. I like Drake London at 4,900, 38.6% target share over the past 3 games, facing an Arizona defense that's, it says by the adjusted fantasy points allowed, it's been negative for wide receivers. It's really not a good pass defense. They also have 2 corners on the injury report this week. They lost Budda Baker to a shoulder fracture. So the pass coverage that is already mediocre, I think will be worse this week. We've had 9+ targets for Drake London in each of those past 3 games, at least 6 catches and 70 yards. I don't think he has the ceiling to be a tournament play, to be a good tournament play, but I like him as a PPR floor play here at 4,900.
Yep, I think London's definitely in the cash game mix.
Tournament side, what you like it wide up?
So Juju is coming in at 7% projected ownership. I'm definitely playing him if that holds. I'll leave DJ Chark too. I'm assuming you have some notes on Chark. I'm going to keep chasing Mike Evans. I don't even know if I can recommend it to you listeners, but I'm just pot committed on the guy. I've been chasing it for the second half of this season. The usage has still been there. He's averaging 8.2 targets per game on the season. He's 9th among all wide receivers in air yards. He's 16th in expected fantasy points. He did go for 9 catches for 96 yards against Carolina back in week 7. And that was the game where on the third play of the game, he dropped a wide open 64-yard touchdown. I remember because I had plenty of him in tournaments that week as well. So a truly massive game was there for him. 10 catches, 150 yards, and a score was right there for Evans in this first meeting. JC Horn out for the rematch. That, probably would have been Evans' primary matchup. So $6,500 and 2% projected ownership. I'm going to take another shot on Mike Evans.
I will not argue against there still being upside to Mike Evans. I will say that expected PPR points since week 9, he's wide receiver 20. So that's in the don't forget about him range, but it's also not in it's there. It's just waiting for him to have a huge week range. And I think when you factor in his offense, his quarterback not playing well, I don't think there's quite the ceiling that we're used to, but there's also not the salary that we're used to. So I can ultimately get behind it, even if I'm less feverish about it than you are.
Yeah, I'm checking right now to see like where he was in expected fantasy points, even like last season. I feel like he's never a guy who's super high there. Yeah, he was 23rd in expected fantasy points last year. He's just a guy that tends to overproduce versus expected points. It hasn't happened this year because the Bucs offense has been crap, but I still think he has the upside for 25-30 point game.
DJ Chark, $4,300, wide receiver 24 in PPR points since returning from injury. That's 5 games. Tied for 43rd in wide receiver salary this week, 5th in our DK dollars per point. I mean, really, that's the case for him. He's in this matchup that is projected for the most points of the week. He's their number 2 wide receiver. I would play him even if you're not playing Jared Goff because he's in single-digit ownership. Obviously, there's a low floor. He has not been a high target wide receiver, but the reason we like him is because the targets that do come are downfield. His quarterback is playing well. It's a high-scoring matchup. It's a high-scoring game. So there's just lots of upside, and I'm not worried really about the risk that comes with it for this particular, format.
Yep, 16-yard average depth of target for DJ Chark. Among his last 5 games, he has outings of 15, 21, and 18 DraftKings points. I was surprised to see him at just 6% projected ownership when I saw that this morning.
I'm on Ross St. Brown at 7,800. Keenan Allen, 7,000 are, to me, the 2 guys that I'm not really worried about their ownership projection and just going ahead and playing some as opposed to full fading because I think they're both excellent bets to get plenty of targets in high upside spots. So I don't think that there's risk that they're going to drag you down with, a third of the field. And there is, on the other hand, risk that either one gets 15 targets this week and just has the monster game that separates the rest of the field from you.
Yeah, I guess the only pushback would be, and especially for Keenan Allen, like, does he have the 30-point upside? We haven't seen it yet this season. I think any receiver getting that level of volume does have the potential to go for that many fans points. I mean, we've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown do it a few times this season. Really, if you look at the usage, like Keenan Allen is getting Amon-Ra St. Brown level usage, maybe even better over the last 5 weeks or so.
Right. 14 targets in 3 of his past 4 games. So, I mean, all he really has to do is hang on, and he has 25 to 30-point upside there.
Yep.
Tight end for cash. What do you like here, Jared?
Evan Ingram, pretty easy for me. $4,400 over the last 4 weeks, 40 targets. That's first among tight ends. 31 catches, first among tight ends. 367 receiving yards, first among tight ends.
Beautiful.
3 touchdowns. That's second among tight ends behind only George Kittle, who has 4. And we saw Evan Ingram have a big game against Houston. I mean, not a huge game, but a nice game. 6 catches, 69 yards on 10 targets back in week 5. That was one of his higher target games. Definitely seemed like a game where the Jags prioritized him in the game plan, which again, I think does make sense because Houston has been a bit better against wide receivers than you might think.
I want to clip those Evan Ingram stats and put them on loop and set them to the music from Chariots of Fire.
Love it.
I think the only reason to maybe not play Evan Ingram is if that salary doesn't fit $4,400. And if that's the case, I would go down to Tyler Conklin at 2,900. He's facing the league's top scoring matchup for tight ends by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. 3rd worst matchup for receivers as well. So if even Garrett Wilson struggles, only more reason to look toward Tyler Conklin in that one. So that's it. Like, Tyler Conklin is a decent player. It's been a better pass offense with Mike White. It's been a much higher volume pass offense with Mike White. So it's just taking a shot that the targets head toward Tyler Conklin in a high upside matchup at a very low salary, of course.
Yeah, my final decision in my cash lineup this week is, do I want to play Fournette with Ingram or Connor with Conklin? That's the decision I'm making. Who should I play,
like
Matt?
the Connor Conklin combo, but that's like a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, our projections have the Fournette Ingram side a bit better, but I haven't decided yet. I think they're both strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you're weighing Connor's ceiling versus Fournette's floor. Obviously, they're both high floor guys because they're getting really high usage. I guess maybe the one thing we don't know is what if Fournette's usage isn't quite to the level that it was last week, but it has been leaning that way lately.
For sure.
On the tournament side, I mean, those guys are certainly in play. We'll see about the ownership for Evan Ingram. I think I'm willing to overlook it, though, in his spot and how he's been producing. Travis Kelce is obviously always in the picture. 8,100 against the Broncos. The Broncos just got lit up by Tyler Higbee, of all people. So we know that there is ultimate upside to Travis Kelce here, whether you're playing Mahomes or not.
For sure, yeah. I always work to get Kelsey in at least some tournament lineups because he does have that 30-point upside that no other tight end has. I think 12% ownership on Ingram, if that holds, I think that's reasonable. I'll still be playing him. Conklin, I think, is in play for tournaments at 7% projected ownership. Jelani Woods, who is $100 less than Tyler Conklin, coming in at 2% projected ownership. Didn't have a big game last week, just 3 targets, but he did run a pass route on 62% of the dropbacks with Kylan Granson out of that game last week. It looks like Granson's going to miss Sunday's game as well. And the previous game Granson missed, that was it was a primetime game against the
Baltimore,
Steelers, I believe. I can pull it up.
It doesn't matter. We all remember the big Jelani Woods Monday night game.
Exactly. 17.8 DK points against the Steelers. So, he's a guy, at least profile wise, has the upside to make some big plays.
Yeah. And I mean, it was clear early in that game that they were trying to get the ball to him. It quickly became clear that Nick Foles was not going to be able to do whatever they were planning to do in that game. You'd like to think that they'll at least be better this week, but you like that we've seen him be central to the game plan, that they obviously need answers, and it's a positive matchup and low ownership and low salary. So yeah, I can get behind taking shots there. George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, I think are worth mentioning just because if anybody gets close to Travis Kelce in ceiling, nobody does. But right behind him in ceiling are George Kittle and TJ Hawkinson, both of them in the 5K range, both of them in single digit ownership. So, if the salary just doesn't fit for Travis Kelce with everything else you want to build, and obviously you're probably building multiple lineups, I think both of these guys have plenty of attractiveness with what they bring.
Yeah, I like David Njoku too. $4,100. He's actually our third best dollars per point value at tight end. He's coming in at just 4% projected ownership. He has 20 targets over the last 3 games with Deshaun Watson. Give me 7 or 8 targets out of a guy this talented, and I definitely like him in tournaments.
Defense, Jared, why are the 49ers $2,900 on DraftKings this week? I'm not sure there's any circumstance by which I'm playing another defense than them versus Jared Stidham at 2,900.
Yeah, I mean, pricing obviously came out before the quarterback news. Even
against Derek Carr, why wouldn't it be in the 3K range?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're playing him in cash, and I think even in tournaments, I'm going to be scared not to have the 49ers defense in there. I'm looking at this is their lowest DK price since week 7 for whatever reason.
Yeah, like normally if a team is going to be the dominant top defense, then I'm just going to avoid them no matter who it is, but not this week. The 49ers against Jarrett Stidham, I don't care if it's, 90% owned. I'm going to go ahead and play them because I'm not worried about the Raiders having some blow up game. Yeah. I mean, I think they would legitimately need like 2 defensive touchdowns for this to be a game where I regret playing them.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's still an argument to look elsewhere for the bigger tournaments. I do think there are some other strong plays, obviously not nearly as strong as the Niners at 2,900, but the Jets are $100 less, coming in at 7% projected ownership, $2,800, and that's a talented defense against a Seahawks offense that's been struggling lately. The Patriots at 2,600, they're actually the highest scoring defense in terms of DraftKings points per game this season, ahead of even the 49ers. They're averaging 11.3 DK points per game. The Pats have 14, 11, and 20 DraftKings points in their last 3 games. And as we said, that's a struggling Dolphins offense with a backup quarterback in there. So I think New England could be a decent pivot too.
But the Patriots' cash cow has been cornerback Marcus Jones on that front. He had the punt return against the Jets. He had the interception return against the Bengals. He's got a concussion, probably not going to play in this game. So I think that's a big knock into their upside this week as a defense.
Yep, good point.
Well, that's going to do it for this week 17 DraftKings podcast. You can head over to draftsharks.com right now. Check out the lineup generator. Build your own lineups for playing on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo. You can also find Jared's articles highlighting the top picks for playing cash and GPP entries on DraftKings this week. If you're on stream, stick around. Like I said, we're separating things again. We will be doing FanDuel after like a 10-second break. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, December 30th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 17 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, Jared Smollett. Jared, we're back to doing FanDuel separate from DraftKings, so it's going to be easier to sort through the guys, especially easier, I think, at quarterback, because a lot of times on DraftKings, we focus on the cheapies, and then we get over to FanDuel, and it's like, I don't need the salary savings as much. Still, a 7K quarterback is going to be the primary guy for me, I think, here. It's not quite as clear as it is on DraftKings this week, but I want to hear who your favorite quarterback is for FanDuel lineups.
Yeah, I started building my cash team here with, either Trevor Lawrence or Jared Goff, who I'm assuming are the 7K quarterbacks you're referring to. I think I might end up playing Teddy Bridgewater, though, for 6,100. It's just, he's so cheap. He lets you do so much in your lineup. And, I'm just taking a shot on a quarterback with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as his weapons. We talked about on the DraftKings show too. This Patriots secondary, all sorts of banged up. They might be missing 3 guys out of their secondary. So, it's not that I think Bridgewater is nearly as strong a play as Lawrence or Goff, but it's salary base and what he lets you get in.
Well, so I'll be curious to hear exactly what he's letting you get in, because that's often not something that we're too worried about on FanDuel. I certainly can't argue with the upside. And by the way, if your name is Jones and you're a defensive back for the Patriots, then you're probably hurting right now. Jared Goff, 7,400 against the Bears. I don't think you really have to make the case for him that much. He's been very good over the past 7 weeks now, I believe it is, facing a high upside matchup, facing a game that went to 61 points in their first matchup. It's the high game in this week's projections as well. So Jared Goff, a strong play. Justin Fields on the other side at 8,400. There's obviously the rushing floor to him. There's a ceiling for him in this game. He's our number 3 quarterback overall in our rankings for the week. So if the salary doesn't end up mattering there, I think he's certainly as strong a play as anybody at quarterback for cash.
For sure, yeah. Fields in play for cash. Fields in play for tournaments. He's 14% projected ownership on FanDuel, but I want to get some Justin Fields in DFS this week, and I think he's a better value here than he is on DraftKings. Fields went for 40 FanDuel points against Detroit when they played last time. I mean, Patrick Mahomes hasn't even shown 40-point upside this season. He's topped out at 35. So I just think Fields has an unmatched ceiling in this matchup. So even at the high ownership, I'm gonna play him some in FanDuel tournaments.
Yeah, and the Panthers went for 527 yards on these Lions last week. So clearly there is no ceiling in a good way for this one. Trevor Lawrence, I like this week, but I can't see playing him at 7,800 in a matchup that has been negative for passing scores, as opposed to Jared Goff for 400 less in a better matchup.
Yeah, I mean, the argument for Lawrence in tournaments is that he's about half the ownership of Jared Goff, and I definitely think it's possible he outscores Jared Goff. So I think I'm going to consider Lawrence in tournaments just because of the ownership and just how good he's been and how much I believe in him in that offense at this point. And then Teddy Bridgewater, 3% projected ownership. I think he's worth considering it on the tournament side as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with playing some Lawrence in tournaments, referring to playing Goff over Lawrence in cash. I like Lawrence plus Evan Ingram. Both were in single digits for projected ownership. I won't be surprised if Evan Ingram climbs there and he, enters Sunday as one of the most popular tight ends. Yeah. That's not going to keep me from playing him, but it's worth factoring in. You could also put those guys with Travis Etienne and just bet on an ultimate ceiling game. Obviously, the better bet is that we don't get ultimate ceiling from a running back and ultimate ceiling from the passing game. But I think this particular matchup, the way Jacksonville's playing, playoffs like coming into view for them, I think there's a possibility that we get this 35-point game from Jacksonville and everybody gets there.
I still think ETN can catch the football too. I know we haven't seen a whole lot of it this season, but they called a screen for him in that Jets game last week that went for 20 yards. That was, maybe they'll see that actually worked and call some more of those.
If you do play Jared Goff, I would go ahead and pair him with Amon-Ra St. Brown plus DJ Chark at 5% ownership and a 6K salary, plus Cole Kmet at 5,300. He is tied for the top ownership projection among tight ends right now. That would generally probably make me fade Cole Kmet, but I just think if you're building this game stack, then we probably are getting passing as well as Justin Fields running, and Cole Kmet is clearly just the easiest pass catcher to bet on that side.
Yeah, I definitely would not play Kmet unstacked at that ownership, but I definitely like him as a run back on your Goff teams.
Plus, if you have all those guys in your lineup, you're not going to be motivated to play DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, I don't like Swift on FanDuel here with the half PPR.
All right. So for running back at cash, what do you like?
Yeah, so Christian McCaffrey's 9,500. I don't think he's as strong of a play on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings. Just with the half PPR here, the price tag, I think he's not as big a value. I like James Conner on FanDuel at $8,000. He has one of, if not the best role among running backs in the entire league right now. 17.7 carries, 5.2 targets over his last 6 games. He's averaging almost 19 FanDuel points per game over that span, and gets a plus matchup against Atlanta. They're 26th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. Travis Etienne, we talked about. I think he's a good value at $7,700. With the type of role he's been playing for the Jags. And then I have Miles Sanders here. We'll see about the knee injury. He's currently checking in as our top value at running back on FanDuel at $6,800. He got 21 carries last week. The Saints run defense has been struggling lately too. They're 22nd in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks, giving up 4.4 yards per carry to running backs over that span.
So you playing Miles Sanders in cash, you're saying, if he checks out health-wise in Friday's practice?
Yep.
I prefer Tyler Algier 6,700 against the Cardinals. 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed are the Cardinals against running backs. Brian Robinson 6,900 against Cleveland. 3rd in adjusted fantasy points allowed. I mentioned Travis Etienne, James Conner, of course, a very strong play this week. One guy that surprises me with how popular he's running is Kenneth Walker. The Jets have allowed just 2 total running back touchdowns since week 7, both of those by Minnesota. They're just under 4 yards per carry allowed to running backs for the season. So it hasn't been an upside matchup. 4 running backs all year have reached 15 half PPR points on the team. So, when we're talking about that scoring ceiling, obviously that applies more to a turning lineup than cash, but we also want somebody that's a good bet to score us some good points at running back on the cash side. And I think that having Kenneth Walker as one of the 5 most popular running backs is ignoring the downside that he just has a bad game here.
Yeah. I mean, $6,700 is a good price for a guy who's, getting 75% of his backfield's work. I think that's the argument in favor of Walker, but I prefer Sanders, Robinson, and Algier straight up this week. And they're all, priced pretty similarly.
Exactly. And then when you see the ownership, we switch over to the tournament side. I think that makes Brian Robinson, Tyler Algier even more popular. Robinson tied for 9th in ownership projection at the moment. Tyler Algier tied for 11th. So they're not truly sneaky, but they're certainly down at the level where you're not worried about too much of the field having them. And the upside is very nice for both players.
For sure. I think those are my 2 favorite plays for FanDuel tournaments. Miles Sanders, 11%, Travis Etienne, 14%. I think you can still play those guys in tournaments as well. Last guy I have here, and I talked about, I've been chasing Mike Evans at wide receiver. I've been chasing Dalvin Cook at running back. And, the one big game he had recently came off the main slate. I had some of them on that, was it a Saturday slate or whatever? But he's coming in at 4% projected ownership at $8,300. He's getting workhorse usage in this backfield in terms of snap rate and in terms of touch share. The Packers run defense. The Packers are 1st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. They're 30th against the run, allowing 5.5 yards per carry to running backs over that span. So it definitely sets up as what should be potentially a bigger game for Cook than it is for the Vikings passing game.
Yeah, I'm not going full fade on $8,000 James Conner just because of his high ownership here, because I do think that there's monster game potential, but I do like Dalvin Cook as a pivot in the same price range, 8,300, far lower ownership, 21.2 opportunities per game over his past 5, and that matchup with the Packers, who have been very bad in run defense, 8th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So we know that there's upside. We know he's been getting opportunities. Really, we just need touchdown luck. If he gets a couple scores here, he's, it's a game that's helping us.
For sure.
Wide receivers for cash, Jared, what do you like?
So I'm starting with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is, one of the guys playing Bridgewater, lets you get in rather than going, 3 cheap wide receivers. St. Brown, 8+ targets in 9 straight games. He went for 17 FanDuel points against the Bears earlier this season. Didn't even score a touchdown in that game. So he's just super safe, I think. I'm going to play Zay Jones in cash, $6,300 on FanDuel. Disappointed last week. Obviously, tough spot against those Jets outside corners in bad weather. Previous 5 games for Zay Jones, 10.2 targets, 7.0 catches, 83 yards, 4 total touchdowns in those 5 games. And we've talked about this Houston matchup. They've been good against wide receivers. They're actually a neutral matchup, though, for outside wide receivers. They've been much tougher against slot guys. Zay Jones has played about 2/3 of his snaps on the outside this season.
And that matches with PFF grades, by the way. It was Desmond King playing in the slot at corner for Houston early in the season. He moved outside with other injuries, but Tavier Thomas has played well in the slot lately too. So they're playing well in coverage. I like Zay Jones as part of a 6K trio. He's at 6,300. Juju Smith-Schuster's at 6,800. Allen Lazard at 6,200. And like might be a strong word for how I feel about Lazard, but I'm talking myself into him being solid here, assuming that Christian Watson is not playing in this game. We have had 3 games for Lazard of 5 catches, 57 plus yards among the past 5 touchdowns earlier this season. So he hasn't been scoring lately, but we at least know that he knows where the end zone is. I don't think he's a tourney play. I don't think he and Aaron Rodgers have ultimate ceiling, but if I can get some 6K number 1 wide receivers for their team this week, I like playing that in the middle of my lineup.
Yeah, definitely on board with Juju. He's a cash play for me. And then that's kind of a decision point with the quarterbacks. Would you rather play Lazard with a Jared Goff, or would you rather play Amon-Ra St. Brown with Teddy Bridgewater?
Mm-hmm. Chris Godwin, 7,600, also in play, 5th in our dollars per point. He's at least $600 cheaper than the 4 guys in front of him in that category. 13 targets in the first Panthers meeting. Of course, that one loaded up on passing volume because the Bucs were trailing desperately. But he has 1 game of fewer than 6 catches since his week 4 return, and he had 5 catches in that 1 game that was below. So he's just been a great bet for opportunities every week. On the tournament side, AJ Brown at 8,400 against the Saints is coming in at single-digit ownership. And obviously, Devontae Smith had the bigger game last week, but A.J. Brown didn't exactly struggle. 6 catches for 103 on 8 targets. So I think there's a little bit of sneaky potential to him at that ownership projection this week.
Yeah, totally. He's our 4th best value at wide receiver, coming in at 5% projected ownership. We know Brown has the upside to lead all wide receivers on this slate in fantasy points. As you said, he had a nice game last week. The touchdowns just happened to go to Devonta Smith. So I think Brown is an awesome tournament play at that ownership. Mike Evans, I'll mention again here, $7,500, 3% projected ownership on FanDuel. I still think he has the potential to, score 20 to 25 FanDuel points. And then Juju Smith-Schuster, we talked about him as a cash play, but at just 9% projected ownership as the clear lead wideout for this Chiefs team, I definitely think he's a really strong tourney play.
Oh, so Chris Godwin's only $100 more than Mike Evans, and he's also in single-digit ownership. I'm going to have a really tough time getting to Mike Evans here. I think you're getting caught in the sunk cost fallacy with Mike Evans.
Maybe. Not literally, but the vast majority of Chris Godwin's targets come like 2 yards downfield. Like he's super safe, but I still think Evans beats him in ceiling.
I don't think so with the way that they're how often they're getting targeted at this point. And I'm not sure how far down the field Tom Brady can see at this age. So maybe that's part of the issue. DeAndre Hopkins is worth mentioning, $8,100, 11 plus targets, 7 plus catches in each of Colt McCoy's 4 games, 5% projected ownership. So, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins himself has upside. The matchup has upside. We can see that clearly. The ownership is down, at least in part because of what happened last week. And playing him could be leverage off of that high James Conner ownership. So if you don't want to play Conner at, along with a 5th of the tournament field, you go over to the wide receiver for his team. You take a shot that they just aren't successful on the ground, or maybe even James Conner gets hurt. DeAndre Hopkins, we know, has, 100-yard, 1 touchdown, 2 touchdown upside, and you can get that at low ownership this week.
Yeah. My only thing with Hopkins is the ceiling, like $8,100. You need, at least 100 yards and a touchdown of him, which he's done once. He's topped 16.7 FanDuel points only once this season. That'd be my only hesitate. Like it's tough for me to play Hopkins over AJ Brown at similar prices and pretty similar ownership.
I can agree with that, but we're taking chances here to try to win the big prize. DJ Chark, I can't finish the category without mentioning him. 6,000, 5%, over 90 yards in 3 of his past 4 games, 2 touchdowns in that span. So, not the ceiling of the guys we were just talking about, but in that 6K range, as much upside as anybody else that's going to be near him in price.
Yep, I like it.
Tight end for cash, Jared. What is it?
Evan Ingram, of course. I think it's pretty easy. $5,800. He leads all tight ends in targets, catches, and receiving yards over the last 4 weeks. He's second among tight ends in touchdowns over that span. Texans 19th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Ingram caught 6 balls for 69 yards on 10 targets against them back in week 5. Was definitely a big part of their game plan in that one, and I think he's going to be a big part of their game plan again on Sunday.
Yes, definitely agree with him as the cash play here on the tournament side. I mean, Travis Kelce is always in the mix here. You're going to play him some, but otherwise, Pat Freiermuth at 5,700 is a potential pivot off of Evan Ingram at lower ownership. He looked better last week with Kenny Pickett back. Kenny Pickett doesn't target Deontay Johnson as much. This matchup with Baltimore. Oh, wait, this matchup got flexed to Sunday night, right? So Freiermuth's not in the main slate.
Yeah, but I'm looking. I'm wondering if our site was wrong. But I'm on FanDuel and I'm on the Sunday Million, which is their big contest, and they have the Steelers Ravens game in there. So I'm. Oh, you know what? And they don't have the Chargers game, which I think was the original Sunday nighter. I'm not sure if they just never made that switch, which they usually do.
Yeah, I was confusing myself there because I know that I picked these plays from the lineup generator directly. Yeah. So I guess maybe that they set the slate that way. And then once they set the slate, they don't change it. I thought it was farther ahead that they had to flex games, but I don't really remember when that move was made. So yeah, I guess we're getting an abnormal slate here and getting that Sunday night game mixed in. Probably, I mean, it must be on both sites. I don't even remember if we had any Steelers on the other one.
It's not on DraftKings. But it is here. And again, no Chargers Rams. So I can't lose more money on Justin Herbert this week on FanDuel at least.
Sweet. So there you go. Pat Freiermuth, 5,700, got lots of targets last week. This matchup with Baltimore is one that has favored tight ends versus wide receiver. It's a neutral matchup for both in fantasy scoring at this point. And like I said, potential price pivot off of Evan Ingram at lower ownership this week.
Yeah, I like it. If you want, you get the Sunday night sweat too, which is always fun. I like David Njoku in tournaments as well. He's $200 cheaper than Evan Ingram, coming in at just 6% projected ownership. Njoku has 20 targets over the last 3 games with Deshaun Watson. He's 5th among tight ends in expected fantasy points over that span. So he's getting good usage. He's an awesome player, which I think he's shown this season when he's been healthy. So I think he's a nice shot to take in tournaments.
And I was talking about Ingram in ownership terms, but looking at the numbers right now, he's not particularly high there. It's Cole Kmet in that price range, who is the one that's too high, quite frankly. So I would play either Evan Ingram or Pat Freiermuth over Cole Kmet just as standalones, without considering game stacking.
Yeah, I didn't realize Kmet was 19%. If that's going to be the case, I don't even think I'd play him on golf teams. I think I'd just full fade him.
I don't know. I think I still kind of like him on golf teams, but certainly not a must play, I would say.
I mean, you could play David Montgomery as a run back on golf teams.
I don't know. Because my ultimate goal, I guess, it could get there as a Bears scoring a lot of points and Detroit catching up. But I think it's more likely that Detroit scores a bunch of points and the Bears are chasing. So, if you're playing it both ways, I can see it. Among all the options, David Montgomery is not the one that excites me on ceiling potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bears are still going to run the ball even when they're chasing. But the problem with Montgomery, he's $7,500.
Yes, that is definitely a problem.
You could play Lion stacks without a Bears run back too. I think that's viable.
I agree with that. Did you throw out Tyler Conklin already? I kind of got lost in all this Sunday night talk.
Nope, not on FanDuel.
4,900, 4% ownership, league's top scoring matchup for tight ends. The Jets, like I said, just simply a better passing team with Mike White than with Zach Wilson. So I think if that salary matters, that's somebody that you can save some extra salary on. Plus, I mean, I don't know that Cole Kmet has more upside than Tyler Conklin. So even if it's just a price pivot in the same range.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the Conklins and the Jelani Woods we talked about on DraftKings, they're not as big a bargains here on FanDuel, so that's why I'd rather stick with Evan Ingram, the David Njoku tier. But I do like Conklin if the $800 matters.
Well, yeah, and we also need targets a little bit less here than we do on DraftKings. So if he can just get in the end zone on even 3 catches, then we've made it more than we did on DK.
Yep, agreed.
Defense, Jared, what's your favorite?
Well, the Niners are properly priced here at $5K. Now we have them at just 2% projected ownership. So, I'm not getting there for cash, but if they're not going to be popular, which I'd still be a little surprised about. If they're not going to be popular, I'd try to get to them in tournaments. I'm starting with the Lions in cash at $3,600, just kind of what I think is the cheapest viable play. The Bears 27th in adjusted points allowed to defenses, even since, if you use the Patriots game when, the Bears offense kind of got going, Justin Fields is still taking 3.1 sacks per game since the Patriots game. So I still think there's a pretty nice sack floor for the Lions defense this week.
I am not going to start with the Lions because I think there are going to be lots of points on both sides of this one that make it tough for that defense to score. Plus, that defense stinks. So I'm going to start with the Eagles at 4,400 against the Saints. Second in our FanDuel dollars per point projections right now. Single digit ownership projection. Tied for fifth at the position in that category. That would be my favorite defense play across formats because it's a good defense, it's a decent price, and it's a high upside matchup against the Saints. I agree that the 49ers at 5K, if they stay down that low in projected ownership, you have to find a way to get to them because there's the ceiling is clearly higher for them against these Raiders than for any other defense.
For sure, yeah. I would go up to the Jets if I had the extra money in cash at $4,100. Just a good defense against a struggling Seahawks offense. We'll see if they get Tyler Lockett back. And the Jets are also just 2% projected ownership, so I think they're a strong play in tournaments. And then, again, like you said, the 49ers, if they don't get to double-digit percent projected ownership, I'm going to try to get them in tournaments.
That's going to do it for this Week 17 FanDuel podcast. You can head over to DraftSharks.com now, mess with the lineup generator, build your own lineups for playing on FanDuel, DraftKings, and Yahoo. You can also find articles from our boy Kevin highlighting top plays in cash and tournament lineups on FanDuel this week. For Jared Smola and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.